Now joining us to talk more about these college campus protests is Mr. Professor Alberto Coll from DePaul University College of Law. Hello, Professor. Welcome to TVP World.
Great to be here with you always.
So we are looking at a lot of these college campus activism right now. What is happening? What is riling up all these emotions?
Well, I think you have several levels, several layers too. One is, as a rule, students are idealistic, and they always look for causes that they can support, where they can pour their idealism, their moral energy. And I think that many of the students who are protesting are obviously driven by these very noble idealistic motives. That's one layer. There's a second layer, which is that American universities over the last 30 years have become relentlessly, boringly, monotonously left-wing. And even though American professors love to talk about diversity, there's one kind of diversity that is missing in our universities, and that is ideological and philosophical diversity. So students have been fed this narrative in which Europeans and white people are always racist, they're colonialists, and they have grabbed on to, as we know, there are no colonial empires left in the world today. So they have grabbed onto this one situation in the Middle East in which they're able to project the Israelis and the Jewish people in Israel as the European white settlers who have colonized this territory called Israel. And that's the image, and that explains also much of their worldview that they have. Thirdly, I think that we should not forget that, as the mayor of New York City noted a couple of days ago, these protests are also manipulated by skilled political agitators. If you look at the faces in the demonstrations, there are always a few faces that definitely do not belong to college students. These are older people in their 20s, maybe 30s, who are agitators and who very much are doing things that students by themselves would not do, such as occupying buildings, such as smashing windows. The vast majority, if not all the students that I personally know, tend to be peaceful people, very loving people who are very idealistic, as I mentioned, but they on their own would not be breaking windows, would not be occupying buildings, they would not be bringing portable toilets in the middle of a campus and declaring war. They would not be also casting the kinds of very nasty attacks that you see often in these protests against the Jewish people, even chants like "Go back to Poland." These are epithets hurled at the Jewish students. So there's a series of layers here that we're watching in action.
Well, I'm going to say this out loud because I think we're all thinking that. I think the statements that you've made are incredibly brave, especially when it comes to that kind of ideological, philosophical diversity. I think that's quite a brave statement that you've made there. I'm going to ask this as well. What do you think these students actually want to achieve on a very practical level?
Okay, so on a practical level, they want President Biden to stop providing weapons to Israel, okay? And they know that the president is in a vulnerable position right now because the president is running for re-election, and young people voted for him overwhelmingly, 60 to 40% the last time around. And so they want to pressure him to stop providing Israel with weapons. And they're also looking to the Democratic National Convention, which will take place just 3 months from now in this city of Chicago, as another way of pressuring the president to do that. That's the first thing they want. They want the U.S. to stop providing weapons to Israel. Secondly, there is also this whole call to divest, to have universities with their massive endowments sell stocks in any company that does any kind of business with the state of Israel. On both of these counts, I mean, I think at a practical level, these are very unrealistic demands. The president, even though he has shown sympathy for the protesters, is not going to stop providing Israel with weapons, simply because he also has to worry about another important constituency in his own Democratic Party, and that is Jewish people. And Jewish people overwhelmingly, historically, have voted for the Democratic Party, and the president doesn't want to lose that vote either. And then on the issue of divestment, I mean, divestment worked to some extent in South Africa, but these were very different times. Nowadays, investment funds control massive amounts of money in the trillions of dollars, and a university simply selling stocks in Raytheon Technologies or Apple or Google or Microsoft is going to have zero impact on the economic welfare of the state of Israel. But again, it sounds good. It sounds like a good call. It sounds very simple. And part of the problem with the student protests is that they're very much black and white. There's no awareness that this conflict, this very bitter, very tragic conflict that we see playing out in the Middle East, goes back a very, very long time, and that there really have not been good guys and bad guys. That this is a very tragic conflict in which there have been massive evils committed, massive injustices, and that the side that they seem to support right now, often they seem to be providing an excuse for Hamas and the Hamas militants. And I don't think they have any sense of what Hamas did on October 7th against the people of Israel. And they don't have any sense that Hamas today is actively using the people of Gaza, the Palestinian people in Gaza, as human shields. And so students don't have an awareness of these complexities, again, partly because they have been educated by their professors to believe in history as the struggle between oppressors and oppressed. And in this case, of course, they have dubbed the Israelis as the universal oppressors and the Palestinian people as the oppressed.
All right, like you mentioned, campus activism isn't something very new in American universities. Back in 2016, DePaul University itself was actually under international spotlight for this particularly same reason. However, we didn't see this level of clashes between students and law enforcement. What made this particular student protest different from those we've seen before?
Well, the worst protests this time around have been at the University of California at Los Angeles, UCLA, and Columbia University in New York, of course, two of the leading universities in the United States and in the world. And I think what has made these protests particularly virulent is that there has been a very strong role played by outsiders in these protests. As I said, students will protest and students will make their demands heard, but much of the activity that we saw, for example, at Columbia or at UCLA was spearheaded, was pushed by outside professional agitators. As a rule, students would not be throwing fireworks at each other. As a rule, students don't smash property. Not here in the United States. As I said, students tend to be generally a peaceful group of people. But the protests have been taken over, in some cases, or manipulated at any rate, by agitators who have a political agenda, who have an ideological agenda, and who their agenda is really to pressure, to create enough chaos, to create pressure on the president. And you see that right now. I mean, the president and in his foreign policy is pushing very much for a ceasefire. Now, the ceasefire, of course, is a very humanitarian step, and there are people in Israel who also want a ceasefire. But we have to remember that Hamas will try to use that ceasefire to reconstitute its militias and get ready to fight another day. And interestingly enough, so part of the reason the administration is calling for a ceasefire is because the administration wants things to quiet down so as to keep together this coalition that would help it win the elections in November. As long as there are student protests, as long as there are chaos on our campuses, it's going to generate among the American public the perception that universities are out of control and that this is part of a broader chaos that is engulfing the United States. Remember, there are many students and their parents who don't have a position on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, who want their sons and daughters to graduate peacefully, to enjoy the fruits of their hard work over the past 4 years, they're not going to be able to have a graduation ceremony in some universities as a result of the protesters' activities. That has to be taken into account too.
Okay, Professor Alberto Coll of DePaul University at the College of Law, thank you so much for giving us all that insight. That was fascinating. Thank you for joining us at TVP World.
Thank you. Thank you.